Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. You know I don't normally do care videos, but this is a request out of the ideas from viewers list is a good look at Miltoniopsis, which I've nicknamed for my own purposes the fussy one. You may agree, you may not. A lot of it will depend on your growing environment, but I'm also going to use it as an update, twofold. I'm going to start with these three. Now these three were all purchased at a reasonable price, I might add, from our 60th anniversary show. They came from Burnham's, but they weren't Burnham's plants. So let me state emphatically, anything I say about these plants is no reflection on Burnham's whatsoever. They originally came from the Eric Young Foundation on Jersey, one of the Channel Islands. And quite honestly, once I got them home and started looking at them, I was incredibly disappointed. In fact, I made a video about how disappointed I was, which I'll stick the link to in the description. They were in a sorry state, basically. First of all, they were infected with Fusarium. The media they were in had rotted the roots, so they started off badly. But nonetheless, they were quite large plants. And when I got them out of their pots, they didn't suddenly separate into 2 or 3 tiny little plants, which is often a trick played by sellers. Makes you look like you've got a big bushy plant when in fact you've got 2 or 3 smaller ones. It's cheating, basically, in my book. But which one's which, I'm not really sure. Yes, I am. So I couldn't be bothered to write a full tag out because they've got long names. Partly in French as well, Eric Young Foundation. But I put colours on them, so that's the pink one. The one at the back, the yellow one, is the yellow one, and the one without the tag is the other one. In other words, it didn't need a tag. I've got all their names, which I'll do as pop-ups. Right, first thing I can say is that these are recovering reasonably well, so that are good. You can see on this plant, I've got a little new growth there. Got another one coming up the middle here, and I've got another one starting here. So this one's coming back into growth. Now this was the one that had an awful lot of rot around the base. I took a risk with this bulb, yeah, because although it shows signs of rot, it's dried off, yeah. So this is no longer rotting, but it has certain signs of rot. And quite honestly, that bulb could come off now. It's not serving much of a purpose, but it has got leaves on. Every leaf, you know, provides photosynthesis, which helps feed the plant. Yeah, so anyway, with this one, this little new growth here, you notice is not enclosed. It seems to have grown out on its own. Well, it had help, basically. Their normal pattern is to grow like this one, inside that bract. Now what I've done here, which is difficult to show you, but what I do with these when I can get at them, is I tear that bract, like that. Now any roots that come out from that new growth can go downwards. They can often get trapped in here and start heading skywards, and they will dry off. Miltoniopsis roots are not best as aerial roots. They're better off, far better off, getting down in the media. So I help mine where I can. Now if you look at this one here, yeah, that's doing exactly what I've said. It's growing inside this lower bract leaf, yeah. If any roots come off of that, if they can't force their way downwards, they will grow upwards. But this one is incredibly difficult to get at. I might try it with the scissors, but the last thing you want to do is damage the new growth trying to help it. So if you're not sure, leave it alone. This is the one that got the, this fell on it. Now that's not only a wooden basket, it's full of lava rock. It's the heaviest object I've got in here, apart from me. And we won't discuss how heavy I am. So that fell on this plant. It broke a flower spike and it damaged some leaves. Luckily, it wasn't a total loss. It could have been, you know. But anyway, this one is coming on. Yeah, that's now growing, and the leaves are clean. It's coming back. Right, we'll have a look at the pink one next. Now again, you can see where my handiwork is. I know it looks tatty and untidy, but eventually I'll trim that off completely once the new growth gets going. But again, this bulb's at an angle, the new growth's come out, and it was totally trapped inside there. It hasn't even started its new roots yet, yeah? But when it does, they can go downwards. And I may even have to top the media up here. Miltoniopsis roots need to get into the media as fast as possible. It doesn't matter if the bulbs are sitting on the media. I wouldn't recommend potting them high like you do some orchids. They need to just sit on the surface. They need to stay constantly moist. If they go totally dry, it needs to be for the shortest possible time. Otherwise the roots will object, and so will the plant. You'll end up with that stop-start thing and get the old concertina leaves if you keep letting it dry and then getting it wet again. Constantly moist, as they say, which is a stupid expression, we all know, because when you water it, it's soaking wet, and then it heads towards dryness. Yeah, but the idea with the constantly moist is not to let them totally dry out. However, they can dry off a bit in between. They don't need to remain soggy. Now this one's only got that one new growth that I can see at the moment, and it's come off the strongest bulb on the plant, so it's growing. That's all I can say about that one. No, there's no signs of any other new growths yet. Actually, yes there is. There's one in there. There's one tucked down in there. So there is another one coming out there. And again, see, that's the front of the new growth. That one's managed to push its way out from this leaf where it would normally have been trapped, especially as that is actually strapped. Yeah, there's actually a tie round there. Good job I spotted that. That needs coming off. I'll do that in a minute. That needs coming off now, otherwise that new growth is restricted. But it would have had trouble getting out through there, but it's managed to get out the other side. So its new roots can now go down in the media. And that's that one coming back. And then this one, you can see I've already not only got at that lower leaf, but I've taken it right off and it's producing new roots from the base of that area. And on this one, yeah, I think that seriously is the only new growth on that one. Yeah. Nonetheless, all three of them are recovering, and my worry about losing them or having to bin them has gone. I'm quite happy that these can stay now. They got treated for the fusarium that was, they were quite heavily infected, I must admit. And now it's just a matter of watching those new growths. The new growths, in theory, if the treatment has worked, the new growths are now clean. Yeah? But you can always get a resurgence, so you know these will need a subsequent treatment in the not too distant future. But I'd like them to get some new current leaves, you know, first. Otherwise all I'm doing is treating the older part of the plant, which has already been treated several times in fact. So that's those three. Let's move on to some others. This one's Junette. As far as the plant's concerned, it's a weak plant. This is not a strong plant. It has managed to bloom, and I hate to say it, but that spike's broken. Yeah, that spike's broken. In a way, that's a bit of a blessing, because this is a weak plant, and producing blooms, you know, just puts a plant under more stress. And Miltoniopsis just seemed to lead a stressed life in the first place. So I'll snip that off and just leave the one bud, I think. No sign of a new growth from here yet. Recovering from what was left of the plant, this new growth pushed on, has a good set of leaves. That crinkled leaf is on an older bulb. Yeah, signs of root stress always, well, and or watering regimes. But the latest growth did actually bloom. Now what I need is another strong new growth to pull that plant back. So that's that one. And there's another one over here in bloom. This is Her Alexander. And you might wonder why this one's covered in moss. Well, this one's covered in moss because the latest new growth came out quite high and all its new roots were failing. You can see where some of them have failed here because they were aerial. So I put moss over them to allow the growing tips to stay moist and try and get it down into the media. Now, being a relatively weak plant, I've always said the bugs will go for it, and that is scale down inside that old pseudobulb. They go for the weakest part of the plant. So this one now needs a scale treatment. Otherwise it's going to... Quite honestly, this is the oldest bit of the plant, and rather than try and treat and worry about the scale, it might be easier just to take that part of the flipping plant off, quite honestly, and leave this bit, which has got the new roots going down into the media. This is weak. It serves no purpose. Probably be easier to just cut the rhizome and lift that part out of the pot. So this one's not growing well. Yeah, having bugs on it doesn't help, but the main part of the plant, the stronger part of the plant, I suspect, hasn't got any scale. Oops, I'm getting a bit close, aren't I? That'd be out of focus. No, see, the latest part of the plant is clean. They've gone for the weak bit, hanging out the back. So yes, I've still got some scale, and that's about... You will possibly get a few mealy bugs on these, as you do with other Oncidium types, but they are prone to scale, along with Cattleyas. My other types of orchids don't seem to get scale, but they do get the mealy bugs. Mealy bugs seem to love dendrobiums, and they go for them. And some of my orchids types don't seem to ever get bugs. I've never had any bugs on the bulbophyllums, as an example. I haven't had bugs on my Dewars. I haven't had bugs on the zygos. Mind you, the way they grow, they just as well have bugs. Yeah, I haven't had bugs on the Coelogenes. So, you know, there's some types of orchids just seem to be sturdier against the bugs. And like I've said, it's, you know, it's all very well having big, strong, healthy plants that are resistant to bugs and saying that the bugs will wander off somewhere else. You know, they can't wander off anywhere else in here. So they end up on the weakest bits of the weakest plants. So that's just how it is. How they know, I don't know, but I'm sure there's some science there somewhere that I don't need to know. I don't need 5 paragraphs on why bugs go for weaker plants. They just do. Reading comments 5 paragraphs long, first thing in the morning, is liable to not get an answer. What is liable to get is the heart, to say, yes, I've sort of seen it, I've sort of read it, and thanks for your efforts, but you know, there's a limit to how much I can do in the comments section. Yes, so I have got a couple of others, including, I'll just show you this one. This was a piece of one of the Eric Young ones that was a piece of the yellow one, and I thought a good yellow Miltoniopsis that's incredibly rare because it's come from the Eric Young Foundation would sell. It would actually be worth money. So I just potted up that little piece, and I've got 2 new growths coming, both of which are totally trapped. So I need to deal with those, so I'll leave that out. Right, as far as looking after Miltoniopsis is concerned, they need humidity. Yeah? That's one of the stresses that they will suffer from, is drier air. Now, your Phalaenopsis may be growing wonderfully. They don't need high humidity. They'll live without it. Yeah? So just because those are growing well doesn't mean to say these will in the same environment. These like good humidity. The species, of which there aren't many, I think there's only 5 or 6 actual Miltoniopsis species in the wild, they come from around the edges and into the montane forests, and you know, that's one of the highest humidity areas that orchids can live in. You could almost say constantly dripping wet. It's just surrounded in fog and mist all the time. But don't get a false impression because of the fog you see where you live, which just hangs in the air. In the montane forest, that air's moving. It's constantly rising up the mountainside, pushed on by the moist air coming in off the oceans. They are a very special place, and some orchids only are ever found in that environment, and Miltoniopsis are either in it or very close. So high humidity. Most of the orchids you will find in the montane forest are low light. Think about it. In a forest, yeah, tree canopy and mist and fog, yeah. They don't see the sun very often. So these are not high light lovers. I'd say medium, pushing medium bright. But again, one of the stresses you can put these plants under is too much light. Yeah. So stress levels so far, we've had drying out completely for any length of time. You'll get the crinkled leaves, because when you start to water again, it'll have done a stop-start. Light that's too bright, yeah. Humidity that's too low, and so far we haven't even gone down in the pot, we're just doing the top, yeah. So they are a little fussier. The other Miltonias in the Miltonia Alliance are far less fussy. There are far fewer in there that are fussy, yeah? But these just are. And if you think about it, they're one of the few Oncidium types that do come from the montane forest. They're different. That's all it is. They're not difficult, they're different. But put them in an environment where your Oncidiums are growing well, you know, with that high light and not necessarily good humidity, and these are not going to do so well. They just won't. They're easily stressed. I think that's the best thing I can say about them is they're easily stressed. They're not that tolerant of not being right. And they won't put up with much, you know. So that's above ground. Temperatures for these grow cooler than your normal Oncidiums. Again, we're back to the montane forest. Misty and foggy and cool. Yeah. So they don't need heat. In fact, I'd say that's another stress level, keeping them too warm. So too much light, not enough humidity, too warm. You can see what I'm getting at about them being a bit fussy, you know. Now when we get down into the pot, every root on a Miltoniopsis is precious, every single one. And every new root that grows on that plant needs to be looked after. And it needs to get into something it's going to be happy with. Yeah? So something that dries out really fast is probably not the best of ideas. Something that stays soggy, again, not the best of ideas. They still like some air in the media. And I'm getting the best results since I switched to a mix of small bark with some medium bark in there to help with the air, and chopped up sphagnum moss to help keep them moist and not let them dry out too fast. Yeah? If I didn't have the moss in there, I'd probably have to water them twice as often. Yeah? But come the winter time, that media will stay wet for quite a long time. So I'll have to adjust my watering accordingly and not give them an absolute soak. More of a trickle, just to maintain the humidity in the pot. But they'll be happier in my environment in the winter because they'll have lost the heat. I mean, most of my Miltoniopsis appear to be growing, but they're doing it incredibly slowly. If all these new growths had started in the autumn, they'd probably grow better, or in late winter, early spring, because then they can push on before the heat gets there. Whereas at the moment, they're trying to grow while the heat's here. So it's a bit of a slow process. So look after your roots with these. They don't like any form of media that's starting to break down. Acidity in the media will knock the roots off. And these are not so easy. Once they lose their roots, trying to get them going again, they're not as easy as other Oncidium types. But they will recover, given the right conditions. Yeah? So again, below the pot, I'm now adopting the same as I do for my Paphiopedilums. My Miltoniopsis get repotted every year at the right time. So I might go longer than a year if I'm waiting for new roots to show. And I really seriously would recommend that unless it's an emergency, wait for those new roots. Because the chances are, when you repot, you're going to lose some of the older ones. Yeah? It's another little fussiness that they're not too keen on being repotted. The root disturbance is not something they're that happy with. but they'll recover and not get set back if they go into a suitable media that's fresh when the new roots are growing. Yeah, so what pot you put them in doesn't matter that much really. Mine are all in black pots to stop the algae growing. That's all that's for. It's not for decoration, it does serve a purpose. Very, very cheap way of still having the clear pots. It means I can still do that and look at the roots. Have I got new roots growing? Well, yes I have. Not many, but some. Some's better than none. Yeah, that's the reason I use clear pots and keep my eye on what's going on. So another one out, have a look at this one. I don't take them out that often. You know, quite a few of those roots are older roots, but there are, you can see we've got some green tips. Yep, so we've got an active root system being generated, and a lot of that will be that I aided and abetted these what would have been aerial roots enough moisture to get down into the media before they got a brown tip and stopped growing. Yeah, that's about it really. Watch your temperatures, try and keep them cool. Make sure you've got some airflow. You know, static air they don't like. They like that air movement, almost to the point of a breeze. It won't do them any harm. So, you know, if you've got circulating fans and you can see your Miltoniopsis leaves actually waggling in the breeze, that's probably about right. Yeah. Keep the light level down a bit. Keep that humidity up. Watch for new roots. If you buy a plant and get it home and take it out of the pot and that media has gone, you've just done the best thing you can probably ever do for a Miltoniopsis. Even if it's got hardly any roots left, leaving it in there would probably kill it. Yeah, so getting it out of that media and getting it into something fresh and giving it a lot of TLC initially, because it will eventually grow some roots. And watch out for plants that have got some rot around the base. When you buy them, they're often potted too deep. Yeah, so you know you can have media halfway up the pseudobulbs, which means the base of the leaves are in the media. They will rot, and then they'll set that rot off into the pseudobulb as well. So just sitting on the top, with just sitting on the top. Don't bury your pseudobulbs. And that's about it really. Nickname the fussy one. As you can see, in my opinion, there are reasons. Almost anything that's not quite right will put the plant under stress. Stress that occurs one subject at a time isn't going to do much to the plant. But you start adding them together, like you've just repotted it, it hasn't got a good root system and it's probably now going to lose the roots it's got, and you haven't got good humidity and you haven't got airflow, each one that you add into the list, yeah, is going to almost doom the plant basically. If you're going to stress the plant in any shape or form, think of the list in your mind and try not to do more than one at once. Try and keep them down to the minimum. And quite honestly, these are some of the most spectacular blooms, the Miltoniopsis. They've got to be worth a try. But I suppose the best advice I can ever give you is when you buy, make sure you get a good one. If it doesn't look that good, and you know, you sort of rummage your finger around in the media and it looks like there's some dead roots, my best advice is put it back. Wait. Get a good, strong, healthy plant where you can see, just ease the media away, you can see that there's active roots heading off away from the plant and it's got some new growths coming and they look strong and there aren't any concertina leaves, the leaf colour's good and there's no bugs. Yeah, but with these, they're often sold because they've got pretty blooms, and it's easy to fall into that trap with these. And there's some right manky, weak, almost dead plants being sold, and they're selling because they've got a couple of smashing bloom spikes on them. Well, just remember they've probably come out of perfect conditions, and they probably started going downhill after they left the nursery. getting bashed around and poor transport and everything. Anyway, that's my take on Miltoniopsis. I will always have some, despite it being too warm for them in the summer here. And they make it through the summer because of the humidity and the airflow. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't. You know, 28 to 30 degrees C is not their comfort zone. Their comfort zone's down near the 20s, you know. Daytime temperature 21, 22 would be great for these, with a drop at night. Yeah, they don't like getting silly cold, you know, but they like it cool. And in that cool, they need humidity and airflow, and not bright light. I know some other Oncidium types, like the Miltonias, often confused but totally different. They're highlight lovers. They won't bloom if they don't get enough light. These will. Yeah. So watch your light levels. And if you're going to go for Miltoniopsis, get the strongest, healthiest looking plant you can, even if it costs you that little bit more. They're not the easiest ones to rescue, but it can be done. Yeah, so it depends on how much work you want to do and how upset you get if a plant doesn't make it. I've probably, apart from Zygopetalums, I've probably lost more Miltoniopsis in the history of my orchid keeping than any other type. Yeah, they are a little more difficult than others, but get their conditions right and they'll grow well and bloom for you. So enjoy, and see you next time. I'm going to add this bit on the end. You're not going to like it, but I'm sure some of you are thinking, where was that lovely yellow Miltoniopsis, the hybrid with no name, with the lovely blooms on? Well, the lovely blooms got instantly taken off. The reason? That's got all the hallmarks of ring spot virus. And that has relatively suddenly appeared. That hasn't just, not overnight, but since I last watered it, that has appeared. Yeah. Now, I've always said with a virus, a plant can live quite happily with it until a form of stress pushes it over the edge, at which point the virus really gets a hold. And although I can't definitely say, I'm reasonably confident. It's got the patterning, and I've never seen the patterning as strong, looking as good until now. I've had plants that I suspected in the past, but I'm almost certain about that. That is a real shame. Now, that could have been living with that for some time, but this has now got to stay totally separate. Watered separately, kept separate, don't touch anything else, and I've just touched the plant. I've now got to go and wash my hands. Yeah. So I'm going to keep it. Now that the blooms are off, it should produce some new growth. And then it's a matter of seeing what happens with that. If the new growths push on and grow some roots and don't form any patterns on them, it doesn't mean it hasn't got the virus, but it means it's managing to cope with it. If the new leaves come out with the patterning on, then I'm sorry, it'll have to be the bin. I can't leave a plant with a virus lying around when it looks pretty certain. It's not quite right for ring spot, but it's the closest I've ever had. It's just the patterning. Why would it form rings and not stripes or blotches or patches? Why would this patterning form the rings? It's all in the name, you know. Anyway, keep it separate, keep it safe, and see what happens. Now that the blooms are off, it should trigger new growths, irrespective of whether it's got the virus or not. It takes quite a lot for a virus to kill a plant dead quickly. They don't work like that. They eat away at it slowly from the inside out. But if I can get new growth that seems to grow clean, then although it may well have a virus and it'll have to stay separate, it can still stay. But it's totally dependent now on what it does next. And I've got a very close eye on it. That patterning has appeared in days, literally days. I'd like to think in the back of my mind, I've been going around with a sprayer an awful lot, and where that plant lived, let me explain, is under this rack. Now I've been using the sprayer an awful lot on my plants recently to save the workload, and that has obviously got feed in it. And for this lot, that would be feed at a relatively strong level compared with what I would feed a Miltoniopsis. Could that be the drips off the plants above? Maybe. I somehow doubt it, but just maybe. Because that feed, I mean, I normally feed my Miltoniopsis with my other cooler growers, so the Masdevallias, Draculas, Restrepias, they get low feed. You know, I'm lucky to go, well, 100 parts per million would be a pretty strong feed for those. I normally feed sort of 60 to 80 parts per million. The stuff going on those plants up above was at 250 parts per million, and it was dripping on the plant. We shall see. Anyway, see you next time. I really hope that one makes it. I mean, that was a gift, and I've really looked forward to that coming into bloom, and it finally did. But this is the sort of thing you have to live with, I'm afraid. Not everything works all the time. So we'll see what happens with this one. Yes, you will get updates. I'm going to have an update every few days on that one, I think. I've really got to keep my eye on that now. And like I said, it's got to stay separate. But not everything works all the time. See you next time. And I just thought I'd show you that before I go. In behind that old leaf base is a new growth. And it's already got a split in the leaf that was enclosing it. So if it's going to grow new roots, they can escape. So we now have something to watch. We do have a new growth on the yellow hybrid. So that's the bit to watch now. That should, if it's not a virus, then it should grow on reasonably strong and produce clean leaves. If it does that, I'll be happy. We'll have to wait and see.